Welcome to the 10th Annual Adrian Cupples Award for Excellence in Teaching, Research, and Service in Biostatistics. For those who don't know me, I'm José Dupuy, Chair of the Department of Biostatistics at Boston University School of Public Health, and I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Cupples for many years. The annual Adrian Cupples Award recognizes a biostatistician whose academic achievements reflect the contributions to teaching, research, and service exemplified by Professor Cupples. Dr. Cupples joined the faculty at the Boston University School of Public Health in 1981 and later served as founding chair of the Department of Biostatistics and co-executive director of the program in biostatistics. During her tenure at the School of Public Health, she advanced the field of biostatistics through extensive publications in major journals and book chapters on collaborative and methodological research, especially as co-PI of the Framingham Heart Study, in development and effective teaching of a wide range of biostatistics courses, receiving multiple teaching awards, and mentorship of numerous graduate students and faculty. Professor Cupples was the first recipient of the Adrian Cupples Awards 9 years ago. We will begin our celebration with presentations from colleagues, family, and former students of Dr. Cupples. There will be a mix of live and pre-recorded presentations. This will then be followed by the presentation of this year's award recipient, Dr. Shi-Hong Lin. I want to take a moment to thank the team behind the organization of this event. Clara Pereira, Senior Financial Administrator in the Department of Biostatistics, Jackie Bose, Assistant Director of Alumni Events and Communications, and Mike Saunders, Multimedia Director. This event could not take place without them. I also want to thank all the speakers who have agreed to participate in this event. Without further delay, since you did not come to hear me speak, I will leave the floor to our first speaker, Chris O'Donnell.
Good morning, all. Dr. Dupuy, distinguished faculty and students, fellow presenters, and Dr. Shi-Hong Lin, the award recipient. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to open this session and to celebrate this remarkable and inspiring career of my longstanding collaborator and friend, Professor Cupples. And I'm particularly honored to welcome Adrian's family, her husband, John, and her daughters, Amy and Allison. You will hear today a wonderful patchwork quilt of anecdotes, toasts, and possibly some roasts of Adrian regarding her brilliant career. My journey with Adrian began over 2 decades ago when we met at the Framingham Heart Study and then collaborated on research on the genetics and epidemiology of risk factors of subclinical and clinical cardiovascular disease in Framingham, as well as in the Charged Genomic Epidemiology Consortium and the VA Million Veteran Program. Personally, our research partnership is truly among my most treasured career experiences. Over more than 2 decades, Adrian and I have co-authored over 130 publications. And as a young physician scientist, working initially in partnership with Adrian, we co-directed population genetics research in Framingham, including the shared GWAS program, and then we helped create and lead the Charged Consortium. Adrian and I shared a passion for human genetics and a vision that genetic analysis would lead to the prevention, treatment, and preemption of chronic diseases. Let me share a few career and life lessons I have learned from Adrian, what we might call Adrian's awesome axioms. Axiom number 1, we are always students, learning for the sake of learning. In a tweet last year by the American Statistical Association celebrating Women's History Month, Adrian was famously noted to have taken her first advanced math course at night school well after graduating from college, quote, just for the heck of it, unquote. What followed was her amazing trajectory through a master's and PhD at BU, with some of her early work being with Framingham BU icons, including Bill Cannell and Ralph D'Agostino, and where she later became founding chair of the Department of Biostatistics. Dan Levy, professor of medicine and longstanding director of the Framingham study, reminded me that Adrian later took up statistical genetics, including a sabbatical to master this new discipline in its very early days. In Dan's words, quote, "For Framingham, this was prescient," unquote. Along her research journey, Adrian immersed herself in learning the basic physiology and pathophysiology of pressing life-threatening chronic diseases, including Huntington's, Alzheimer's, obesity, diabetes, mellitus, and coronary artery disease. And at the same time, she is and has been a gifted and patient teacher, even for her non-statistical colleagues like myself. I personally owe much of my own statistical genetics knowledge to Adrian and several of her BU Biostats faculty members. Axiom number 2, invest in interesting and transformative collaborations. In the words of Vasan Ramachandran, professor of medicine and PI of the Framingham study, Adrian, with her rare and deep understanding of people, institutions, pedagogy, scholarship, and academia, exemplifies the best practice of team science both within and outside the Framingham study. And as one who served with her over nearly 2 decades, I can attest that Adrian did the hard work of showing up and fully engaging as a true biostatistics leader in essentially all the major committees and working groups that laid the groundwork for major advances made by collaborative team genomic science, both in Framingham and the CHARGE consortium. Mind you, the notion of collaboration and data sharing among more than 2 population cohorts was essentially non-existent and took a fair amount of diplomacy mixed with persuasion. On behalf of the genomics research community, I say thank you, Adrian, for your contribution to transformative team science. Axiom number 3, invest in great people. Make no mistake, the incredible success of Framingham Heart Study Genetics and Genomics is in large part attributable to the team of biostatisticians, women and men recruited, mentored, and supported by Adrian and her successors. And as was noted by Amelia Benjamin, professor of medicine and a senior Framingham investigator, I most admire Adrian for her capacity to recruit, retain, and advance superb faculty. She truly recruited an all-star lineup. Finally, axiom number 4, lead with compassion and kindness. Well, beyond being an accomplished scientist and respected academic leader, Adrian is just a superb human being with a contagious joy for research. This was always evident at our wonderful dinners and receptions at more than 20 CHARGE consortium meetings held across the US, Iceland, and Netherlands over the past decade. 2 co-founders of CHARGE recently sent their congratulations and weighed in. Said Bruce Pasady, a professor at University of Washington and PI of the cardiovascular health study, a great collaborator and friend. Adrian has always been a patient voice for superb science. And said Andre Oederlinden, professor at the University of Erasmus and PI of Rotterdam, apart from being an excellent and very smart scientist, a very nice person with well-developed sense of humor and always a pleasure to work with. So my list of Adrian's awesome axioms could go on, but in the interest of time, let me close by saying, Adrian, on behalf of the Framingham family, the CHARGE family, and the MVP family, a big congratulations and an even bigger thank you for making a difference.
Thank you, Chris. And I should have said that Chris is global head of cardiometabolism translational medicine at Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research and professor of medicine at the VA Boston Healthcare and Harvard Medical School. And as you have heard, Chris has a long-term collaborator with Adrian. Next, we're going to hear from So-So Twin.
The 10th anniversary of Adrian Cupples Award to honor and celebrate Dr. Cupples' work and contributions. My name is So-So Twin, and I join you from the very cold and windy Geneva, Switzerland. Adrian was instrumental in my journey as a biostatistician. I took her stats methods in EPI course some 20 years ago, and this was a time when core biostats courses were held in the evenings to accommodate those who worked full days. And so not sure if that's still the case. And come to think of it, 6 to 9 p.m. might not have been an optimal time to wrap our heads around complex theories, but we managed, and Adrian created a relaxed learning atmosphere. She was very engaging and thorough and made sure that we understood our concepts. And some years later, Adrian became my doctoral thesis advisor. After a quick exchange that went something like this, I gathered enough courage to go up to Adrian and introduce myself and started out with, "Hi, Dr. Cupples, my name is Susu Nguyen." And Adrian immediately jumped in and said, "I know who you are." And she knew her students and their learning styles, and I learned a lot as a result. Adrian was an expert at breaking down complex concepts to the core essentials and didn't lose sight of the how and the why we're doing this. And this resonated with me and I was very much drawn to the applied side of biostatistics, which is founded in both the statistical theory and epi methods. And that's where I actually ended up. And so I would like to say a little bit about what I'm doing at the moment. Currently, I'm working for the World Health Organization here in Geneva, Switzerland, in the Department of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research. And I lead a small team, and it's a quantitative assessment team of 9 total biostatisticians and data managers to support the research globally on thematic areas related to family planning, infertility, reproductive cancers, sexually transmitted infections, and violence against women. And we are currently supporting 22 projects, and we cover the entire spectrum, starting with study design, protocol development, data platform development, study implementation, training, the researchers, analysis, of course, and publication, and ultimately archival of all the essential study documents. And these projects are primarily large-scale trials, cohort studies, global surveys, or implementation research. And related to the COVID pandemic, we were involved, and we are actually currently still involved in 3 projects. We developed 2 generic protocols. And the first is a pregnancy cohort study to compare the SARS-CoV-2 exposed to non-exposed pregnant women to evaluate their pregnancy outcomes. And this protocol is being adapted in 12 countries, and we're writing the statistical analysis plan for that. The second is a cross-sectional survey to evaluate the health systems on their provision of comprehensive SRH services during the COVID pandemic. And this protocol is currently being adapted in 9 countries. And as a third project, we set up a global data platform to collect clinical management data on patients who were admitted with confirmed or suspected COVID. And we collected and are actually currently still collecting data spanning from admit to discharge or death. And we've just completed the statistical analysis plan, and we'll be going forward with the analysis for that. And so the 2 main objectives that I was involved in was that the first was to evaluate the factors associated with the risk of disease severity at admission, and the risk of ICU admission, and the risk of death. And the second objective is to conduct a longitudinal analysis of event rates to determine temporal trends. And currently we have over 86,000 case records from 35 countries. So a lot of analysis going on. Coming back to breaking down complex concepts. So I just want to say this is really applying those concepts to understand in simple terms and then move forward globally. And for that, I thank BU Biostats Department for creating a learning environment. And Adrian, thank you very much for your passion in teaching and your guidance all these years. And I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we'll have Andrew Damakosh, Vice President, Head of Data Science at Ironwood Pharmaceutical and former student of Adrian.
Thank you, Jose. First of all, welcome, and I just wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to say a few words at the 10th Annual Couples Award. As Jose said, I'm a former student of Adrian's. As Jose also said, my name is Andrew Damakosh. I happen to live in Boston, back right around the corner from School of Public Health in the South End. I have 2 grown children, and they fortunately don't live with me any longer. So as the agenda shows, I am currently working at Ironwood Pharmaceuticals, which is a company that specializes in gastrointestinal diseases. However, I recently accepted a new position, which I'll be transitioning to very soon, to the company BioNTech as head of global biometric sciences. And my first task there will be to build out the biometrics organization. And I'm pretty excited about that. BioNTech is a company that you may have heard of. It's the developer of the first COVID vaccine, but its primary focus is still not about infectious diseases, but about novel approaches to cancer treatments. I am proud to say that I was one of the first 2 students to matriculate in the Biostats doctoral program that Adrian helped founded. With a little bit less pride, I can also tell you that I wasn't one of the first students to graduate from that program, but graduate I did. With regards to when I first met Adrian, I can't really remember. It was quite some time ago. I think it was actually before I matriculated to the program. I was in another grad program. It's a story for another time, but I think I can easily say that I've known Adrian for more than 30 years. So we go back, way back. In terms of what Adrian really helped with me and how impactful she was in my career, it's, you know, as you go throughout your career, as I have, you meet lots of people and they all have contribute to your career in all kinds of different ways. But if you're lucky enough, there are a few people who are truly impactful, and certainly Adrian falls into that category. Obviously, she's been important in my knowledge. I've taken many courses from her. And even to this day, I can honestly say that a core part of my knowledge comes from sitting in her wonderful classes. But I can also say that there have been many good teachers throughout my academic career, and specifically at the School of Public Health. Each and every one of the teachers has just been terrific, and I can honestly say that I continue to be a student because of my training at school. Adrian was also the first reader on my thesis, which any of you who are going through it or have gone through it know it's mostly an exercise of patience and persistence. Getting the right amount of encouragement is critical, and Adrian was wonderful at doling that out in hefty quantities, which I needed desperately, and I will always be grateful for. But if I had to sort of boil it all down, I think that where I found Adrian to be most impactful in my professional life is pretty simple, but I think quite significant. And that is, and it's been mentioned a couple of times now already, as the student-teacher relationship. As you start your career, you learn how to be a good student, even beyond academics. You're constantly learning from the people around you, you're learning your trade and your craft, and you're absorbing everything you possibly can. And then at some point in your career, you start becoming the teacher because you've gained all this knowledge. And again, this is where Adrian has helped me, and I constantly think back to those times about her teaching capacity, her patience, her willingness to explain things multiple ways. It's something that I employ even to this very day. And so for that, I really thank Adrian. And it was quite an honor to be able to tell that to everybody who is willing to listen. So thank you very much. And I look forward to the other talks.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we are going to hear from Manar Abdelrahman El Hassan, another one of Adrian's former student.
It's my honor to have this opportunity to say a few words on this occasion celebrating a distinguished Professor Adrian Cupples. My name is Manar. I am a Boston University alumna. I graduated in 1995. I am currently working as an associate professor of biostatistics and head of Department of Public Health, College of Health Sciences, Qatar University. Before joining Qatar University in 2016, I was affiliated with the University of Khartoum in Sudan, where I served as the Dean of the Faculty of Mathematical Sciences. I was also previously affiliated with the Non-Communicable Disease Unit at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK. I also spent some time at the Radiation Effects Research Foundation in Hiroshima, Japan. For the past 2 decades, I worked extensively with UNICEF and other international organizations as a complex household survey expert, mainly working in Middle East and North Africa and other countries as well. My research interests includes advanced statistical and epidemiological methods and applications in many areas. Population-based cancer survival and maternal and child health are of particular interest to me. I have known Adrian since 1991, when I first joined Boston University as a PhD student in the biostatistics program. She was the first person I met on my arrival. Her care and our immediate connection made her my advisor. She also taught me a number of courses. I still remember her command of difficult topics and her calm way of delivering material. From her, I got my inspiration to be an educator. She was my support during my time at BU, some of which were difficult times, particularly having a newborn child to care for on my own. She taught me to be strong, calm, patient, and most importantly, persistent. She guided me generously with ample knowledge and professionalism. With her continuous encouragement, knowledge sharing, and support, I was delighted to complete the program in good time and become the first graduate of the biostatistics program. Unfortunately, she could not attend my graduation due to some pressing family commitment. On that day, in 1995, Adrian was awarded the Norman Scotch Award for Excellence in Teaching. I was the most fortunate person to receive the award on her behalf. She was truly a superb teacher and mentor. What a pleasant coincidence to be speaking today at the 10th Annual Adrian Cupples Award. Her contribution to science is vivid and is growing around us. I value a lot of my successful professional career to my education at BU. and particularly to Adrian, who taught me to be a good biostatistician and to like biostatistics as she does. Thank you for being next to me, supporting me in all aspects in my life. My heart is filled with an abundance of gratitude. Thank you for being my friend.
Next up, we're going to hear from Rick Myers.
My name is Rick Myers. I'm a neurogeneticist working at the BU School of Medicine, and I've been working with Adrian for at least 30 years. If we were speaking in chronological order of the people who have worked with Adrian the longest, I would be the first speaker of the group speaking today. I've been trying to remember exactly how I started working with Adrian, and I think it was Ralph D'Agostino around late 1983, perhaps 1984, who suggested that I get in touch with her. And I remember I was working on a project in Huntington's disease, and the project I was looking at involved a hypothesis where the descendants of men with Huntington disease had a younger age of onset than the descendants of women. But I was aware that the data set that I had included descendants who were not yet old enough to manifest Huntington disease. So there was censoring of the data. And I didn't know how to handle that statistically. And Ralph suggested that I get in touch with Adrian because she had experience in that field, I think working on her dissertation, but I'm not sure about that. Actually, we published a paper in this area a few years later, and that was titled Using Survival Methods to Estimate Age at Onset Distributions for Genetic Diseases with an Application to Huntington's Disease in the journal Genetic Epidemiology. By my count, Adrian and I published 58 different refereed manuscripts together during our collaboration. These covered a wide range of different disease entities and statistical methodologies. We started using segregation analysis to study patterns of familial aggregation. We also studied candidate genes using single nucleotide polymorphisms or mutations. We did genetic linkage studies, genome-wide genetic linkage studies. We did genome-wide association studies, and we studied a whole host of different traits that I'll talk about. The first manuscript that Adrian and I published together was in 1984, and that was titled Increased Risk of Suicide Among Patients with Huntington's Disease. And the first paper we published together in the Framingham study was in 1989 with Bill Cannell, and that was titled Coronary Risk Associated with Age and Sex of Parental Heart Disease in the Framingham study. The last paper we published together was in 2016, and that one was titled Novel Genetic Variants Are Associated with Increased Vertebral Volumetric Bone Mineral Density. So you can see we studied a wide range of different disease entities and used a wide range of statistical methods. In 1987, we created the extended pedigree data sets in the Framingham cohort, and these used information provided by interviews in the original cohort and the offspring cohort for all the biological relationships that were known in the Framingham study. So it was the first time that all these biological relationships were recorded in a single data set. In 1995, we performed a 10 Centimorgan genetic linkage study using the 332 largest families in the Framingham cohort, and this involved 1,702 examined Framingham study participants from both cohorts. Many hundred parent-offspring pairs, sibling pairs, avuncular pairs, cousin pairs were included in that data set. In 1995, we created the Framingham DNA Study Committee, and that was in collaboration with Jose Ordovas, who had collected blood samples for other purposes, but had preserved the white blood cell buffy coats so the DNA could be collected. There were 6 different NIH-funded genetic studies in the Framingham study that Adrian and I worked on. The first was with Ron Sperduto, titled the Framingham Offspring Eye Study. The next was with David Felsen, Heredity and Generalized Osteoarthritis. We had a grant with Doug Keel titled Genetic Epidemiology of Osteoporosis, a grant with George Grates titled Genetic Epidemiology of Presbycusis, which is age-associated hearing loss, and 2 grants with Phil Wolf, one titled Precursors of Stroke Incidence and Prognosis, and one titled MRI, Genetics and Cognitive Precursors of Alzheimer's Disease in Framingham. The traits we studied included hypertension, lipid profiles, diabetes, obesity, pulmonary function, deafness, lens opacity, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, stroke, dementia, and others. And then there were the grants where I was PI on Huntington disease and Parkinson disease, or where Lindsay Farrer was PI on Alzheimer's disease. So we studied a wide variety of different disease entities. At various points in time, there were at least 7 or 8 different NIH-funded grants that Adrian and I were working on together simultaneously. Over the 30 years that we worked together, we met together several times a week. I'm sure there were more than 1,000 different meetings over the course of our collaborations. There's no doubt that I benefited greatly from Adrian's expertise and input on these many projects. She's highly knowledgeable and a most treasured colleague. It's been my pleasure and honor to have worked with her, and I'm sure that my reputation and the quality of my work has benefited tremendously from having had her as a colleague. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Robert Green, Professor of Medicine, Harvard Medical School, and geneticist, Brigham and Women Hospital, and Director, Genomes to People Research Program. If you want to share your screen.
Yeah. Is there somebody else you can go just before me? I've got like a minute or 2 to set up so that I can show you.
Definitely. We can go next to Michael Posner, Associate Professor of Statistics and Data Science and Director, Center of Statistics Education at Villanova University. Michael, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, guys. It's nice to be here with you. Good morning. Thank you, Adrian, for giving us a reason to come together, and to Jose for the invitation to speak here. I'm really honored to be invited. I thought I would start with a little bit about my path, which led me to BU, and my work with Adrian. I've wanted to be a teacher since I was young, and I chose higher education because I thought it was a great lifestyle. My dad was a professor as well at Johns Hopkins University. He was an organic chemist. He and I used to joke together that no one could go through college without hating at least one of us between organic chemistry and statistics. And I really have taken it as my goal in life to really change that bad reputation that sometimes we get. So my path led me to Boston University for my PhD so that I could pursue that life goal, and provided me a chance to work first at the Data Coordinating Center and then at the Women's Healthcare Research Unit while getting my PhD. Took me 9 years post-master's to do that because I was doing it part-time, and I finally completed that in 2006. One of the things that I really appreciated about BU was the chance for me to teach every semester that I was there. I had the chance to teach either at the main campus or at the School of Public Health, eventually with Adrian as well. Where am I now professionally? As Jose mentioned, I'm at Villanova University. I think that BU definitely gave me a leg up in that job application because of all that teaching experience. And as someone who was working full-time, also came in with 12 peer-reviewed publications, which is something that academics are looking for. Currently serving as past chair of the section on statistics and data science education, helping to guide about 1,400 statistics educators around the US and the world, and definitely taking some of the lessons that I learned from Adrian in that role. I'll get to those in a minute. I'm a fellow of the ASA and an accredited professional statistician as well. So as we all know, academia involves that three-legged stool, if you will, of teaching, research, and service. And in thinking about what I wanted to say about Adrian, I thought I would break it down into those pieces. Teaching. I started off, obviously, as a student of Adrian's in a few of her classes, and always felt that she was an expert teacher. She was incredibly organized and was really great at getting to the heart of whatever topic it was that we were discussing, and as folks have already said, explaining it in a way that made it make sense. I took a course with her that she co-taught with another faculty member, and I really learned so much from that about the importance of statistical discourse and the importance of conversing with people about the options. I think one of the things that people find hard about statistics is that it's not definitive, in that there isn't only one answer. There's often multiple approaches and multiple answers, and it's up to us to be able to understand and describe why one method is superior to another, or about the convergence of methods that give us more confidence in our results. And she really role modeled that. Lastly, one of the things that we have to do when we're in an academic environment is teach. And most programs don't really spend a lot of time training you on that. In my work with statistics educators, we talk a lot about assessment of learning, or summative assessments versus assessment for learning. I'm sorry, which are formative assessments. So summative assessments, assessment of learning, formative assessments, assessment for learning. And one of my memories was the exams that Adrian gave in one of the classes. I remember leaving the exam feeling like I think I knew the material, but also I learned a lot from the exam about how to apply it. And I think being a role model for us on how to write good assessments is something that we often don't see, don't get enough of in our training as academics. Second of all, as I mentioned, one of my reasons for choosing BU was the opportunity to teach while doing my PhD. That opportunity doesn't happen by itself. And I know that Adrian, in her role in the department, was definitely helpful along the way to provide me that opportunity, for which I'm incredibly grateful. Lastly, as I mentioned, I had the chance to be her co-teacher in an intermediate statistics class, where I was really honored and flattered that she invited me to join her as a co-teacher in the class. And I really appreciated being able to just sit there and watch her, not as just a student in the classroom, but as the epitome of a great instructor, and pick up on the small tips about how she did it, how she taught so effectively, that I really appreciated. In addition, I remember one situation when she offered me some constructive criticism, and I was really pleased with how kindly she delivered it, and how generously she offered it. And so I've really kept that with me as well. Research, the generosity that she served on many leadership positions that is listed on her CV, and many other folks will talk about. For service, I know one of the things that my department has been talking about of how to evaluate for tenure and promotion is part of service is about good citizenship. One of my other recollections of Adrian, and this is something I appreciate more and more as I am now mid-career and balancing family and work and other things, is Adrian always seemed happy to see anyone and talk with them about things. And that openness is really something valuable. One of the topics that I began to study recently is student attitudes towards statistics and towards data science. I have an NSF grant that's going to create an instrument on that as well. And one of the things we talk about is how important the soft skills are, even though we don't like the term soft skills. And I have to say that Adrian is, in my opinion, one of the best people to watch in terms of that. She has always been thoughtful with her words, generous with her time, and very humble in how she presents it. In closing, I mentioned my dad earlier. One of the pieces of advice I got from my mom is we should choose our friends and our role models wisely. Often people mistake the desire to find everything in one person. And her recommendation was, don't expect anyone to fill all the roles. If you want a role model for teaching, look at this person. For service, look at this person. For navigating politics in the department, look at this person. And I just want to say that I find that Adrian is one of those people that really is a role model in all of those aspects, teaching, research, and service, as well as those softer skills of communication and generosity and humility. So I just want to thank Adrian for being a role model in all those ways, for all the ways that you taught me, both formally and informally, and let you know that I can say with confidence that your legacy definitely lives in me, as I know it lives in many of us who are here today celebrating you and your career. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We will now hear from Adrian's family, husband John, and daughters Amy and Allison.
Screen share, sorry. Nope, still the wrong. Can you see the slides?
Nope. Nope.
Allison?
Hello. We can't see the slides.
Oh, sorry.
There's also a high squeal. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Is that any better?
Yes.
I'm sorry, having trouble getting to switch.
So John, I'm gonna share the slides and then maybe you can tell me next slides when you're ready.
Okay.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
opening
Sorry
the
about that.
document. Hang on one second.
Thank you.
I'm going to, yeah. So just tell me when to
Great. Yeah.
move.
Okay, Allison.
Good morning. We are honored to present our perspective on Adrian's career at the School of Public Health on this 10th anniversary celebration of the L. Adrian Cupples Award. First of all, we would like to congratulate this year's awardee, Dr. Shihang Lin of the Harvard Chan School of Public Health.
Next slide.
It's
Next
coming.
slide.
There's a little delay. Sorry.
During her career at the BU School of Public Health, Adrian managed to successfully integrate and balance family and work. On some occasions, the boundaries overlapped.
Next slide. Presenting today are Allison, John, that's me, and Amy. On behalf of Adrian's foremost cheerleaders, we present a family's perspective on Adrian's career at the School of Public Health. Next slide, please. Adrian's teaching and research occupied an important role in her life, but she expertly juggled many interests, as we've already heard, and seemed to have fun doing so. Next slide.
Adrian originally began taking math courses at Boston University because it was fun, and she actually enjoyed it. Next slide. At this point, Adrian had no intention of getting a degree in math. She is quoted in answering, "Anybody who gets a degree in math is crazy." She was involved in many other things at the time, including having her first baby, me. As she moved through her math classes, I remember attending school with her. Maybe not when I was a baby, but I do remember the computer rooms collecting her printouts of her work and all of the punch cards. Next slide.
Well, things got a bit more serious after that. Adrian discovered biostatistics. Her interest was ignited at the thought that she could apply her math skills and knowledge in a fashion that had practical effects on people's health. Adrian was now motivated both by enjoyment and a strong sense of value. This resulted in Adrian working into the wee hours of the morning, long after the rest of us had collapsed into bed, exhausted from trying to keep up. Next slide.
And she kept having fun all the way through her thesis. Her thesis defense was solidly successful, which I attended in utero. I was born just in time to attend Adrian's PhD ceremony, as you can see in this picture. Next slide.
During a 1981 cocktail party at the home of Tom Lewis, her thesis advisor, Ted Colton invited Adrian to join the BU School of Public Health faculty. Ted was very persuasive. Adrian was very interested. Next slide. BU School of Public Health and Adrian's career overlap in a major way. As the years increased, so did the blending of her family in the school. Both daughters spent a great deal of time at the School of Public Health offices, and all of us at various other events, including summer softball games. Next slide.
Here are some of Adrian's biostats. 1 spouse, 1 husband, John, 2 sisters, Shirley Ann and Linda, 2 children, myself and Allison, and 3 grandchildren, Jackson, Samantha, and Ishelle. Next slide.
And here are some more biostats. She was a whitewater enthusiast in the northern wilds of Maine and also on the Colorado River. She was an avid walker and still is. And she has 53 years of association with Boston University. She's published more than 600 papers, and she has more than or around 167,590 citations, according to Google Scholar. And one memory I'd like to throw in here as well is one night I was having troubles with my physics homework. Someone mentioned my mother's ability to break down complex concepts into small and manageable parts. She was excellent at this, not just in mathematics, but in her parenting style in general. So that translated into her parenting style as well. And one night when I came down with this physics problem, she quickly went over to the side, solved it for herself, and turned around and helped me work through it. We spent hours at the kitchen table as she broke it down into smaller pieces for me to understand and then to solve, eventually getting to that final answer. And she still thinks math is fun. Next slide.
It is clear to us, and I think clear from those who have spoken thus far, that Adrian still thinks math is fun, but her joy of math comes primarily from the students and colleagues with whom she has formed lasting relationships over the many years at BU. Next slide.
And she's not done yet. Thank you for allowing us to tell a bit of Adrian's story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation of your journey with Adrian. Now, Dr. Green, are you ready for your presentation now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so
You
next
have to
we'll
allow me
hear.
to start my video, though. It says the host has stopped my video.
Okay, so Jackie, are you able to help that as we
Yep.
resolve this issue? Great. Professor Green is professor of medicine, Harvard Medical School, and geneticist at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and director of the Genomes to People research program, and a collaborator of Adrian.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen, but first I'm going to tell you that I'm in my car in downtown Boston because internet went down around my house, and I so wanted to do this that I've come down here to share with you using my hotspot on my phone. So I'm going to share my screen here, and collapse this, and tell you that
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Tell you that the talk I generally give when I go out and give talks now is genomics, and I've been lucky enough to be one of the world's leaders in thinking about what's going to happen with DNA first, when all of us have access to our genomes. This all got started with something we called the REVEAL study, Risk Evaluation and Education for Alzheimer's Disease. And this was a randomized clinical trial where we looked at the disclosure of ApoE for Alzheimer's disease. This came as a result of work I did with Lindsay Farrer at BU, and around those times I got to know Adrian and asked her for statistical help putting the very first grant together. And this was a pretty crazy idea at that time. We were considered to be unethical by some people. We were considered to be dangerous by some people. And Adrian was just so calm and so supportive and so focused on the science. And, you know, from time to time, she would say, you know, are you sure this is a good idea? And, but so she kept us honest, thinking about the downstream consequences of everything. But subsequently, we did publish over 50 manuscripts from the REVEAL study. We demonstrated to the world that the narrative of catastrophic psychological distress was simply not true in individuals who sought out their own genetic risk information. This is particularly ironic hearing Rick's mention of a suicide in Huntington's disease, because it was really Huntington's disease that launched that narrative in genetics. But we went on to study the downstream outcomes of people who had gotten direct-to-consumer genetic testing in the PGen study, the first trial of whole genome sequencing in the MedSeq study in adults, the first randomized trial of whole genome sequencing in the BabySeq study, the first sequencing study in the active duty military, and all the way down to the bottom there where you see the POP or population sequencing study, which brought us back to one of Adrian's homes in the Framingham heart study. And Adrian has been a trusted and beloved collaborator of me and everyone on my team from the very beginning, and literally allowed me to remake my career in preventive genomics from my previous career in neurology. We've published, I think, I didn't count them specifically, but I glanced at them, I think over 45 papers together. But this was one in particular that just sort of demonstrates how generous Adrian was. We needed a paper to go to sort of talk about the methods that had been developed, that she had developed. And it literally involved all this math that I was helpless to try to do. And Adrian, you know, painstakingly agreed to do this paper, which then became the linchpin of the curves that we created, the cumulative risk curves that we created for the disclosure of ApoE, and became the linchpin of our ApoE projects in the REVEAL study. And then all of those went on to perform the basis of all the grants and papers that we subsequently got. It's just a kind of example of how, you know, act of academic generosity, which might seem small at the time, helping to really lead this one paper, had so much flowering and meant so much to the people who have come along this stream of research. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings, which Adrian would faithfully come to as we would launch each of these projects. And there you can see her right in the middle where she belongs. But what's really not captured by too many of these photos, I could show you a dozen of these, is sort of the warmth and really love that Adrian exudes for everybody around her. I know everybody on this call is aware of this, but that's my daughter to her left. And my daughter was working with me that summer. And you can just see that Adrian embraced everybody, even the research assistants in all aspects of the study. And she's just also a lot of fun, as everybody on this call knows, but maybe the world doesn't fully realize. You can see the blow up of this picture here where we are hamming it up a bit in this photo. And it's just one quick visual insight into how much fun it is to be around. So, you know, my career has taken off, I guess, into the direction of preventive genomics. Adrian's not in this picture, but this is a picture from a recent gathering just before the pandemic of my research group. But I really see Adrian as one of the authors of everything that I have done, everything that I've built, and everyone that I'm teaching along the way. And so I want to thank you, Adrian, and I want to let you know that everything you've done means so much to me and to the people that I've been privileged to work with and to teach. And your legacy and your influence and your love will carry on in everything that I do, and I think everything that they do. So thank you.
Thank you for your heroic effort into making sure you were with us today, despite your technical challenge. Next, we are going to hear from Jose Ordovas.
My name is Jose Ordovas, and I am a professor at Tufts University and director of the Nutrition and Genomics Lab at the USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, from now on HNRC. And well, now I am grounded in Boston for the last 12 months. But before March 2020, like many of us, we were traveling all the time. So it has been a big change on our lives. Well, but the focus here is Adrian. And I met Adrian, I would say around 1990s. And if I remember well, our first encounter was at the HNRC. And I think Rick Myers was probably the facilitator of that encounter. I have been working with Rick Myers in ApoE for a few years by then. I would say that unlike many encounters that happens just once, you know, this one was the origin, the initiation of a wonderful and long-lasting collaboration that was based on mutual respect and admiration, and evolved into a friendship. As a disclaimer, I will say that given my nil background in statistics at that time, I did not catch most of what Adrian was telling me during that meeting. But it sounded really impressive, and I hope I impressed her as much with my talking about lipoproteins. Well, what has been the quantitative outcome of that initial meeting? We have published together around probably 100 papers during 25 years, year after year, since 1994 to 2019, mostly obviously under the Framingham heart study umbrella. In the beginning, the focus was on what was the focus also of the Framingham study, which was the identification of novel risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So we were there doing a lot of work, for example, with Lp(a). That is one of the lipoprotein subfractions that at that time it was not clear if that was a cardiovascular risk factor or not. But thanks to the studies that we did together characterizing new ways of measuring Lp(a) and so on in the Framingham study, now this lipoprotein particle is recognized as a clear cardiovascular disease risk factor. And again, this is nothing that, as I mentioned, we didn't have clarity back in the 20th century, but now it is clear. Then we were fortunate to be funded by NHLBI to do collaborative studies in terms of genetics of lipoproteins, mainly in the Framingham study, and that has been the major link, glue of our, let's say, career together. We were among the first to look at gene-diet interactions. What we now know as precision nutrition, well, started with some of our seminal studies looking at the Framingham study. The first encounter that I mentioned at the HNRC at Tufts was the only visit that we had from Adrian to our center, because from that time on, the journey was in the opposite direction, from Tufts to BU, which was good for my physical health, because exercise is good, but also for my intellectual health, because every meeting was a learning experience. During that process also, we created some kind of lipoprotein club, and we have interactions with outstanding students from Adrian that were involved in our interactions. For example, Gina Pedoso, and then she went to work with Sek Kathiresan at the Broad, and it should be noted that Sek became the guru of lipoproteins and cardiovascular genetics, and in addition to these interactions that we had in terms of projects. We had many other interactions as part of NIH committees and the like, and it was, for me, it was always great to see her familiar and friendly face. In fact, the last event in which I was fortunate to meet Adrian was in person, was during the 70th anniversary of the Framingham Heart Study, and I was really happy about it. I can honestly say that I owe my professional success as an investigator in the field of precision nutrition to the good fortune of having known Adrian and maintaining our interaction and my learning from her during all these years. So, Adrian, many, many thanks.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Elisa Manning, Assistant Investigator, Clinical and Translational Epidemiology Unit at Mass General, an instructor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and also an associated scientist at the Broad Institute. Elisa?
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Elisa Manning, and I am a former student of Adrian's. I obtained my bachelor's degree at Boston University in mathematics and computer science. And at that time, I loved probability and problem solving. Statistics was never even on the radar. I was inspired by problems in statistical genetics, so I did find that a master's degree in biostatistics appealing so that I could really engage in a field where we could do some problem solving. Turns out that there's a lot of statistics. And so within my time at Boston University getting my master's degree, I fell in love with the field, but it was Adrian's class in statistical methods and epidemiology that really sparked the energy that I felt in the idea of epidemiology and really applying statistics to public health. So Adrian must have seen that spark as I was a student in her class, and she invited me to join her group as a research assistant, which was a really fantastic opportunity. I was pregnant with my son at the time, and over the next 6 or 7 years, I not only expanded my family, but I enrolled in the PhD program within the department and was lucky to have Adrian agree to be my thesis mentor. So as you can see from the slide that I'm sharing, she was very inviting. So as a young woman in a mathematical field, she brought me right into the fold. Here you can see the number of co-published papers, and I've highlighted the years between 2006 and 2012, and you can see that right from the get-go, she got me involved in some empirical data analysis with large-scale data sets and genetics in the Framingham heart study. I really was able to apply my skills in computer science and really engage with a wonderful team doing really cutting-edge statistical analysis. So for her, she recognized me and that I loved data analysis and put me right to work. Often things were not about prestige when it came to where our focus was. Her focus was with us as her students and her mentors, our mentees. The focus was on personal growth and of us as people first, then as students, and then as scientists. Well, Adrian was also very brave. She stopped and asked a lot of questions pretty much everywhere we went, in every setting. She taught us that concepts and results should be explained in accessible and simple terms. And Adrian taught me that bringing people into an idea was more valuable than impressing others with a complicated concept. So this concept has helped me so much build bridges between disciplines and also encourage growth in my own mentees. Then Adrian was sustaining. She got to know all of us in our cohort of graduates around the years 2011 to 2012. And she found ways to sustain relationships with all of us in our own special ways. For me, I absolutely adored our walks around cities during breaks at meetings. Some friends of mine loved having our quiet dinners out with Adrian. We would get together at the beginning of the meeting and conspire as to what evening we were going to try to capture her and take her away so that we could spend a nice meal with her. We were really lucky to be part of Adrian's academic family, and we are really blessed to have grown ourselves and grown with Adrian over the years. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jose.
Thank you, Elisa. Next, we're going to hear from James Meigs.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Adrian. You know me, but to introduce myself to the others, I'm James Meigs. I've lived in Boston, the Boston area, for 40 years, and I've known Adrian for almost that long. I'm happily married, the father of 3, and the grandfather of Fiona, who's shown here in a clip from a message I got from my daughter-in-law, who took this picture of me, Jimmy, explaining the genetics of diabetes to Fiona. And I've blown this up on the right here so you can see that either she is saying, what the heck is this guy talking about? Or she's passing a little gas. And I know Adrian's grandmother, and you can make your guess here. Anyway, back to the topics at hand. I'm a professor of medicine at MGH and Harvard Medical School, and a primary care internist at Mass General Hospital. I started my research fellowship in 1992, interested in type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. I had the opportunity to work with Framingham, and I was assigned to Adrian to supervise my analyses of hemoglobin A1C. Soon, she and I formed a type 2 diabetes research team that moved into genetics, as Adrian was the quotes genetics person, I think, along with Marty at Framingham at the time. Then Adrian and I went on to hire Jose Dupuy, and really the rest is history. So in terms of my professional career, Googling Meigs and Cupples, the first paper that we published, and these next few defined really my career. So we looked at glycated hemoglobin in the Framingham Heart Study. We looked at insulin resistance syndrome and made a major contribution to the concept of metabolic syndrome with this paper. We were interested in pre-diabetes and what is the metabolic state of people at risk to develop diabetes in the future. Very quickly, I think this might have even been my fourth paper, we started to look at genetics. Here we looked at ApoE isoforms measured on the biomarker itself, inferred the genotype to look at their association with insulin resistance. This is one of, I think, my favorite papers with Adrian, looking at parental transmission of type 2 diabetes in the Framingham offspring study. And I cite this paper a lot in my own talks because of some of the really good ideas I got from Adrian in the analysis. So just jumping ahead a few papers, very soon in Framingham, we had access to genome arrays. This is the big effort across Framingham to look at genome-wide scan. Again, looking at hemoglobin A1C, always interested in that. And then just to leap ahead to our most recent paper with TopMed. So we go from inferring genotype from biomarker levels all the way to sequencing of over 50,000 genomes in TopMed. And Adrian and I are both authors on this paper together, and I think we both feel pretty proud of that. So my professional career, looking through things, Adrian and I have written 76 papers together. So I think that it's fair to say, Adrian, that you've completely shaped my professional life. From the very first paper to the most recent paper, we've been co-authors together. And I think I just owe a great debt of gratitude to your approach to mentoring, and also to speaking of work-life balance, especially as grandchildren came on. We always made an opportunity to meet together at charge meetings and TopMed meetings. I think that recently we had a mega sushi dinner at one of the last charge meetings face-to-face in Houston that will live in memory in my mind for the volumes of sushi consumed by everyone involved. You always managed to achieve your work-life balance really, really admirably, balanced against remarkable award-winning leadership that I'm sure others will touch on. So I think the last time you and I saw each other, not the last time, but one of the last times, we were at a TopMed meeting in Virginia, and there was a little nature strip out behind the housing development. And we were both out early in the morning looking for some nature, and we happened to run into each other right as a flock of goldfinches came by, and we both stood and looked at them and remarked about how they're such an interesting bird because they're around all year, but in the winter they become kind of drab, and in the spring they transform themselves into this marvelous plumage like you see here. And so we looked at the birds and we exchanged a few more pleasantries and we said, see you later, because we had to go inside and to the meeting. And so I just want to thank you, Adrian, and say, see you later.
Thank you to all of the speakers. Now I would like to give the opportunity to Professor Cupples to say a few words.
So can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a remarkable day because how often do you have the coincidence of opening day for baseball, April Fool's Day, and the Cupples Award Day? That's pretty amazing, I think. I want to say first that I'm really humbled by all these tributes. I didn't know that I did so much. And I especially want to thank my family and my husband in particular for their support all these years in helping me pursue my career, as well as being involved in my family. I want to say thank you to my colleagues. I always said that I could, work in my office all day long doing coding and so forth, but I didn't really want that career. I wanted a career where I interacted with other people. And so having a career where I had colleagues as wonderful as the ones you've seen here, as well as others, really carried me through my career. It was a lot of fun working in teams, trying to develop research hypotheses and then figuring out how can we go about evaluating those hypotheses and then ultimately carrying out a study and doing analyses and writing papers. So I learned a great deal from my colleagues. I really enjoyed the teamwork, and I owe a lot to all of these colleagues. And finally, for my students, they're my pride and joy. I'm wonderful. It's wonderful to me to see how they've gone on to their careers, they've carried forward and shown to me that the integration of statistics, theoretical statistics, methodological statistics with applied problems has been a great front to pursue ideas and learn more about human health. I certainly want to say that not everyone who spoke today is the full circle. There's many people who haven't been recognized, and I want to recognize all those people with whom I've worked with and all the students I've mentored. Finally, I want to say congratulations to Shihang on this award. I think she's a wonderful choice and she's been a great leader. So I look forward to her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you to all of the speakers who came today. At this time, I'd like to, we're going to take a short break. I thought being on Zoom for 2.5 hours would be a little bit much. So we are, same link in 10 minutes, we are going to come back for the presentation of the award to this year's recipient. So don't go far and just stretch your legs a little bit, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. I want to welcome you to the 10th Annual Adrian Cupples Award presentation. For those of you who are just joining now, I'm Jose Dupuy, Chair of the Department of Biostatistics at Boston University School of Public Health. This annual award recognizes a biostatistician whose academic achievements reflect the contribution to teaching, research, and service exemplified by Professor Cupples. Dr. Cupples joined the faculty at Boston University School of Public Health in 1981, and later served as founding chair of the Department of Biostatistics and co-executive director of the graduate program in biostatistics. During her tenure at Boston School of Public Health, she advanced the field of biostatistics through extensive publications in major journals and book chapters on collaborative and methodological research, and the development of effective teaching of a wide range of biostatistics courses, receiving multiple teaching awards and mentorship of numerous graduate students and faculty. Professor Cupples was the recipient of this award, was the first recipient of this award 9 years ago. It is my distinct honor to introduce this year's L. Adrian Cupples Award recipient, Dr. Shihong Lin. Dr. Lin is professor and former chair of the Department of Biostatistics at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's also the coordinating director of the program in quantitative genomics at Harvard School of Public Health. She's a recognized leader with impactful statistical development in mixed models, non-parametric and semi-parametric regression, missing data, and measurement errors for analysis of longitudinal data. In the past 15 years, Dr. Lin has become a pioneer in statistical methods for analysis of whole genome sequencing. The selection committee was most impressed by Dr. Lin's extensive list of publications in leading journals, her impactful research in genetics and genomics, her many leadership positions within the profession, and her outstanding record in education and mentoring. Dr. Lin will add the Adrian Cupples Award to numerous awards that she's already received for her groundbreaking work, including the 2006 CUPS Presidential Award, which is considered one of the highest awards in statistics, the Janet Norwood Award for Outstanding Women Statistician, and the Florence Nightingale David Award given to distinguished female statistician, to name a few. She's an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association and the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, and she was elected to the National Academy of Medicine in 2018. Without further delay, I'm very pleased to leave the floor to Dr. Lin for her presentation, and congratulations on this well-deserved award.
And thank you so much, Jose, for the very generous introduction. Let me share the screen first. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's not in, yes, perfect.
It's okay now? Okay, and first of all, I'm extremely honored to be selected for the this year Adrian Cupples Award. Especially this is the 10th year anniversary. So I listened to the talks this morning, and they were so touching and also reflect so much of what I have known about Adrian. So first of all, I would like to thank Adrian and for being such a wonderful role model for many of us, not only women, but also men as well. And she has accomplished in almost every single dimension we could think about in our discipline, serving as the founding chair of the BU Biostatistics Department. She's a remarkable leader in statistical genetics method and application, as many of the guests, her collaborators and students mentioned this morning. And so one thing really inspired me is she's not only dedicated to statistics, she's also very dedicated to science. And so she integrates statistics and science extremely well. So this is really important lessons for all of us to know. And she has made a major impact in the Framingham heart study as the co-PIs and in the last 35 years. And so as multiple her former students testified this morning, and she is a fantastic mentor, and not only for her own students, and so for many junior faculties and in BU and also in the statistical community and beyond. And so several speakers this morning commented on her soft skill and the leadership. I very much second to what has been said. And she is a visionary, and she is always warm and calm, and she makes people feel comfortable around her, and especially the junior faculties and the students. She's always positive and always humble and very generous, is always supportive to many of us. And she's a strong community builder, and also she has a strong communication skills. Just so many things I could learn from Adrian. So I'm just very grateful to have the opportunity to get to know you, and also thank you so much for what you have done, and to many of us, and also to our community. Okay, so this talk will be not on genetics, and because I feel this is a special year, so I would like to share with you some of the work and we have been doing on COVID-19. And many of when I think about the work we have been doing in the last few years, and I can see that a lot of agent characteristic influence me and in what we have done in the last year. So I'll share with you some of the work we have done on analyzing the COVID-19 data. So this is just a quick overview about how we stand right now. And so you can see that this is a terrible disease which has affected almost 130 million cases and in the world, and then caused 2.8 million deaths. And if you look at the curve on the left, this is a case rate. And so you can see that both the US and the UK, the number of cases have been going down very well in the earlier this year, but now there's a trend of going up. But if you look at Brazil and also the Eastern Europe, you can see that in Hungary, for example, the cases begin going up very quickly, and also in Brazil as well, likely due to the new variants. And similar curve can be found about the death rate on the right. So here is the talk outline. So I will first talk about the COVID-19 transmission and intervention. I'll start from the historical review of the analysis of Wuhan data. Then I'll talk about the US and the world data. Then I'll discuss the epidemiological characteristics of COVID-19. And then I'll focus on the, next I'll focus on the 2021 playbook and defining challenges, in particular vaccine rollout and uptick, and also the scalable testing, in particular, how can we safely open schools and by using the efficient pool testing. I'll talk about particular design we developed called the hypergraph factorization design. So let me start from the Wuhan data analysis. And so I happened to get involved in analyzing the Wuhan data last February. My former postdoc, Chaolong Wang, after he finished his postdoc training, he spent some time in Singapore. Then he joined the Wuhan, he joined the Huazhong Science and Technology School of Public Health. And then last February, because Wuhan was epicenter, so I wrote a message to Chaolong, asked how he and his family were doing. And he was telling me that they were analyzing the Wuhan data, COVID-19 data. So at that time, there was already one case in Seattle, one case in Boston. So I got the sense that the disease might spread. So I decided to join them to analyzing the Wuhan data. And the team, especially colleague in the Huazhong Science Technology University School of Public Health, they work extremely hard and so the team want to share the findings and with the world and to help as many countries as possible. And so with the we posted the first preprint and in medRxiv on March 8th, and so which analyzed 26,000 COVID-19 cases. And so this preprint attracted quite a bit of attention. You can see the number of download and abstract, and also I tweeted the findings as well. And because the material in this preprint was too much, and so we decided to split the work and also update the findings and using updated data and of the 32,000 cases until March 8th. And then the first paper was published in JAMA in April, and the second paper was published in Nature last summer. And so the Anpan and Chaolong Wang, they both were Harvard Public Health alum, and also Tang Chun Wu is the Dean of School Public Health in Huazhong Science Technology University. So they were incredible to work with. And so last March, after the preprint was posted, and I was approached by many media outlet and for interviews, and then but I turned down all the interview because in March, and so I as a statistician, and we have not been trained to talk with the media, so therefore I did not feel very comfortable talking with the media in March. But then in April, and so because situation got worse, and I decided probably it's a good idea to agree to talk with the media, and so to help the general public and the policymakers to understand and the findings, and then we can help the US and other countries more effectively. And so therefore you can see there was quite a bit of coverage and also media interviews on the last spring. And one important things I learned was that scientific communication was extremely important. And so when we talk with the general public, it's important to talk in simple language without jargon. And Adrian is a great role model for this, and in terms of scientific communication. And I testified in the Science and Technology Committee of UK Parliament on April 17 and shared with the 8 to 10 Parliament members about the findings of our Wuhan studies. And then later on, the committee wrote a letter to the Prime Minister Johnson and making 10 recommendations. And I was honored several of the recommendations and I made were included in the letter. And then earlier this year, at the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic, Nature published a series of editorial. One of them was on the key findings of epidemiology and on COVID. So we were honored that our Nature paper was included in this editorial. So let me first start talking about what we found when we analyzed the Wuhan data. So now this term, RT, this effective reproductive number, is a household term. And so basically this RT measures the number of infected individuals by a case. So if RT greater than 1, that is bad, that means the disease spread. If RT less than 1, that means good, that means the disease under control. So you can see on the right that RT equals 4, that means 1 case infected 4 people. So here is where the Wuhan is located. It's in the central part of China, and it is a metropolitan city. It has a population size of 11 million. And it is a beautiful city. So if you look at the picture on the left, this river in the background is called the Changjiang River. It goes through Wuhan city. It's the longest river in China. And the picture on the right, this is cherry blossom in East Lake in Wuhan. So this is just right now, it's about the time of cherry blossom in Wuhan. So it is definitely a beautiful city. And something happened in December 2019. So the first case, COVID case, was detected on December 8th in this Huanan seafood market. And this market was closed on January 1st. So if you look at the figures on the left, So that indicates the number of daily cases and over between January and March. And so you can see that before January 23rd, then the city, there was no intervention. And so you can see the number of cases went up exponentially. And then we estimated during this period, the RT value is about 3.5. So what that means is one case infects 3 people. So that means the first feature of COVID is highly transmissible. Then on January 23rd, and the city was locked down, and with the traffic ban and also the social distancing policy. And so you can see this definitely helped. And then the number of cases significantly reduced, but still going up. And then the city realized that because many people live in apartment, it was very difficult and for them to isolate at home. And then also many of the cases, they could not receive the medical treatment because of the traffic ban. And so on February 3rd, that was the launch of isolation, centralized isolation and quarantine. So basically the city built 16 field hospitals and 2 new hospitals by converting stadium and exhibition centers. And then that really helped. As you can see that during the lockdown, the RT value was about 1.2. After the centralized isolation and quarantine, and then the RT value quickly dropped below 1. By March 8, it was about 0.3. And so the last spring, and in US, we also built many field hospitals, but the strategy was different. And in Wuhan, and the mild cases were admitted to the field hospital. If any of them became severe, and then they were transferred to the main hospitals. And also the close contact, and also the people who had symptoms, and they were quarantined at the hotels. But in US, and even we built many field hospitals, only severe cases, they were admitted to the field hospital, and mild cases, they were quarantined at home. And so therefore they were isolated at home. So therefore they could still infect family members. And so the strategy we used in US was different. And so then in order to estimate those RT values, and the model we fit was based on this Poisson partial differential equation dynamic model. And so basically, if you look at the figure on the left, and so between the exposure and the symptom onset, this is called incubation period. Generally, this is about 5 days. And between the exposure and the pre-symptomatic onset, and so this is called the latent period. So what that means is a patient was infected, but is not transmissible. And then this period generally is about 3 days. And between the pre-symptomatic onset and symptom onset, so generally this is about 2 days. So a patient was infected, but the patient does not have the symptom. But during this period, it is transmissible. And so when we extend the traditional share model to this new model we call Shepherd model, we try to accommodate the natures of COVID. In particular, we build in this pre-symptomatic component, and also we build in another isolation component. Because in Wuhan, at that time, the testing kits was not widely available. So therefore, there were many unascertained cases. So therefore, we built in another component that is unascertained component. And the observed data are here. Those are the data I showed you on the previous slides. And so we basically built the Poisson model, and then assuming the mean of the I, and follow this kind of partial differential equation, and then relate it to other departments. So all the other compartments, they are not observed. Only this part is observed. And by fitting this model, one can calculate the RT value for each of the period. So basically, as I mentioned, that only this data, uncertain cases are observed. All the other compartments were not observed. And then we modeled them through the Poisson regression model and with the mean through the partial differential equations. And then this is the likelihood. And then we estimate this using the Monte Carlo Markov chain. So if you look at the figure on the left, so you can see that if there is, suppose there were no intervention, and then the blue curve will be the predicted number of cases in Wuhan. So you can see that reached the herd immunity when 70% of the cases were infected. And so that means 7 million people in Wuhan were infected. Then that can reach the herd immunity. Many of the people are elderly, many people would die. And so the natural herd immunity strategy was not a good strategy. And if you look at the figure on the right, so suppose we want to continue the social distancing. And so you can see this is a projected number of cases. And then definitely that is much better than without intervention, but was not good enough. And so this multifaceted intervention strategy in Wuhan was effective in less than 2 months. And then there were zero confirmed cases in Hubei province. And also by March 8, the city was reopened. Basically, the pandemic was under control and to reach the zero COVID case in less than 2 months. So the takeaway number 1 is the social distancing and the centralized isolation quarantine were critical for controlling the outbreak. So social distancing definitely helped reducing the R to be around 1, but was not good enough in Wuhan. And the reason is social distancing helped block community transmission. So that is a between household transmission. However, within household transmission and the close place transmission are very common. And then especially in Wuhan, many people live in apartment. So it's difficult for them to isolate at home. And many of the infected cases are family cases. So the similar findings were found in Massachusetts data. And so by adding centralized isolation quarantine to social distancing, that helped crest the curve and stop the epidemic in Wuhan. So this finding was replicated in multiple countries in last spring. So for example, if you look at the figure on the left, then you can see that in Italy, and it used the social distancing, and you can see the RT staggered around 1 for over a month. Similarly, in Germany as well. And the second feature we found in analyzing the Wuhan data was the virus was the highly convert. And so we estimated about 87% of the cases were undetected. So what that means is detected cases are the tip of the iceberg. So if you look at the figure on the left, then the red bars are the detected cases and uncertain cases. The yellow bar are estimated uncertain cases. Many of those uncertain cases were asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic cases. So we estimated a large fraction, 87%, were undetected, were uncertain, based on the PCR test data. And so it was nice to see that our findings were replicated using the serological study. And just last week, and there was one paper, serological study paper was published in Lancet using the Wuhan data. It's estimated 82% of the Wuhan cases were asymptomatic. So that's pretty similar to what we found using the partial differential equation model based on PCR test data. And the estimated prevalence was about 6.5%. So this also consistent with what we estimated. And so this result was also similar to the CDC finding last year. The CDC found that based on serological study, and the number of cases is 6 to 24 times higher than the detected cases based on the PCR test. So this is a take-home away number 2. So in order to control the pandemic, it's important to use multifaceted intervention. Those include mask wearing, social distancing, widespread testing, and the contact tracing, and supported isolation and quarantine, and also vaccination. And so this we call the multifaceted intervention. And in our JAMA paper last summer, a nicer term was given called a sweet cheese model. So we all know the public health control measures that can work. The challenge for us is how can we improve the implementation and the compliance? So this was a challenge for us last year. And also the final component is the vaccine. So the science was really amazing. And so the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were very successful, has 95% efficacy, and this was achieved in 1 year and to develop those vaccines. So it's really amazing how the scientists have done to help the world last year. So last summer, we also launched this website, which provided the real-time RT estimate at multiple resolution, and it's a country, state, and county level. So this work was led by my student Andy Shi and the postdoc Sheila Gaylor. And so there was this, our website was featured and in Nature, this Nature article last summer. So in order to estimate RT, so basically we fit this COVID epidemic regression model. So this is model is different from the traditional Poisson regression model and make it suitable to modeling infectious disease data. So the YT is the daily case count, for example, like the daily case count I showed you in Wuhan. And then we estimate this lambda t, and this basically called the infectious potential, and the in Poisson regression, this is called offset. So this basically estimates the number of people at risk. And so that uses the zero interval, multiply the number of daily cases, for example, in the last week. And then one fit the Poisson regression model. So here we extend the traditional epidemic model by query by allowing the RT follow a smooth curve using the splines. So here are some results. And so here I just want to highlight Israel. Israel is really remarkable. You can see that they are the leader in terms of vaccination. So right now, almost 50% of the Israel population has been vaccinated. So you can see their RT is really amazing. The RT is about 0.65. And the number of cases has been going down. This is how the US data look like. And so this is a world map I just downloaded yesterday from the website. So right now the RT value in US is a little above 1. So you can see the cases starting going up, likely due to the new variants and from UK, the UK variants, Brazil variants, and the Africa variants, and also new emerging variants in US, for example, in New York City. And if you look at China, you can see that this is great because there's basically very, very few cases. We could not estimate the RT. And so the several Asian countries and also Australia, you can see that, and New Zealand, they are doing extremely well. And so this is Massachusetts. And so this is RT map I downloaded yesterday. And so you can see that the cases are going up. And so in Massachusetts, and the RT is a little above 1 right now. You can see the cases it's going up in Massachusetts, and also in Michigan, New York City. And so definitely the vaccination effort is amazing right now, but it's not enough. We still need to keep the control measures on. So this is also likely due to the new emerging variants as well. So let me first next talk about what are the factors associated with the COVID infection. So let me start from the Wuhan data. And so this was a finding from the JAMA paper. And so on the left, that indicates the case rate, what attack rate, and in each of the period and by age group. So you can see the purple and also the yellow bars are the attack rate and for elderly. And so the older people were infected more and in Wuhan. But if you look at this red bar, and those are the children, so you can see that the children's and has the lowest infection rate. And in Wuhan. And so this was true last year as well in the spring. And then on the right, and the purple bar is the attack rate by the healthcare workers. You can see that before the lockdown and centralized isolation and quarantine, healthcare workers, they had a much higher infection rate and then general public. And so this finding also helped last year when I presented in the spring and before Harvard was closed, that which I showed this findings. That means that the healthcare workers, they were in Wuhan, for example, they were before the lockdown, they were not aware really aware of the COVID. And so that's why, and they had a higher risk of infection, especially without being protected by PPE. And so this also brought an important message last spring that about the PPEs and the supplies. And then after I present these findings and the last March, and then in the following week, and there was a national campaign and helping the healthcare workers and with PPE supplies. And also the elderly, and they were more aware of the virus, and they were more cautious, as you know, that in the summer and the fall, the cases in the US more younger people than elderly. And also last April, we launched the How We Feel app, which collects the data of COVID symptom, behavior, and testing result. And so this app has over 750,000 users and also more than 15 responses. And then this was work in collaboration with Feng Zhang at Broad. Many of you know his work on the CRISPR genetic editing, and also Dan Superman, who's a CEO of Pinterest. So this is really a wonderful collaboration between academia and the industry, because the industry colleagues, they are much better at developing apps and also distributing the app. So let me first show you what we found last spring and in the US, who were more likely to be tested. And so this paper was published in Nature Human Behavior last summer. And so we found that last spring that sick people were more likely to be tested, and also vulnerable people were more likely to be tested. In particular, people who had CDC symptoms, and also healthcare worker, essential worker, and people of color, they were more likely to be tested. So in other words, if we analyze the data among the people who were tested, this is not a random sample. And so when we study what other risk factors associated with the COVID positive test, and if we restrict the analysis to those who were tested, this is not a random sample. So we need to account for the bias sampling. So this is what we did. And so when we try to study the factors associated with the infection in US, and because the sample of those people who received the test were not a random sample, so we use the inverse probability weighted method and to correct for the selection bias. So this is what we found. We found males were more likely to be infected than females, and also people of color were at higher risk of infection, and also healthcare worker and essential worker were at higher risk of infection. Secondly, we found that exposure, both within household exposure and also community exposure, was highly significantly associated with infection. So if you look here, you can see that within household exposure, that odds ratio is almost 17. And then for the community exposure, the odds ratio almost 3. So what this tells us that we need to break the within household and the close place and the community transmission chain. And the close place include the nursing home, homeless shelters, and prison. And so this finding was supported by the Massachusetts data and last year, and in the Massachusetts dashboard, and it showed that 88% of COVID cluster were household cluster. So that means household transmission is very common. So we need to protect family members. And also we found that the most important symptom were not fever and cough. And the most important symptom was loss of taste and smell. So odds ratio is almost 33. So among those who were infected, 40% of the cases had this symptom. And among those who are not tested, only 0.6%. And then this symptom is also help us to distinguish from the flu symptom. And so this is more important than the fever and cough symptom. So now let me move on and to the playbook and the defining challenge this year. And first, I'll talk about vaccine rollout and uptick. So last year, the science was really amazing that the scientists were able to develop several successful vaccines in a short time. And then the challenge now is the vaccination program. So basically, how can we get the vaccine in people's arms? Second, how can we ensure equitable and scalable vaccination program? And third, how to overcome vaccine hesitancy. I'm going to focus on this one. And the second component of the playbook is the widespread scalable testing. And in particular, how can we ensure safely opening the school? And many public schools have limited resources. And then I'm going to talk about pooled testing. And also just yesterday, and the FDA approved this rapid at-home testing. And so one can buy those testing kits at home. This is also wonderful. And the third playbook component is we did not do well in terms of implementation and the compliance of public health control measure last year. So can we do better? Even as you know, like even for mask wearing, it was a challenge last year. So can we do better this year in terms of implementation and the compliance of public health control measures? So let me first talk about vaccination rate and equity. And so this figure was downloaded from the our World in Data website. So you can see that Israel definitely is a leader in terms of vaccination, and he's vaccinated almost 50% of its population. And so if you look at the figure on the right, it shows shows a huge inequity in terms of vaccination rate. If you look at Africa compared to other continents, the vaccination rate is much, much lower. So this is we all know that none of us is safe unless everybody in every country is safe. So therefore, it's important to help the poor country with the vaccination. So WHO has this COVAX program and trying to help the poor countries. So important for the developed country to donate vaccine doses to poor countries. And also this paper was published in the Lancet Infectious Disease 2 weeks ago. And so in this simulation study, and they showed that even vaccine substantially reduce the transmission, say 85%, but the RT value can be still greater than 1 in absence of other control measures. So if you look at the figure on the right, and the x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is basically the shows the vaccination rate. So you can see that this darker means vaccination rate goes higher. Black means vaccination rate is 1. As time goes on, vaccination rate get higher and higher. But if you look at the corresponding RT curve, it can be still greater than 1. So what this tells us is we need to vaccinate as many people as possible, as fast as possible. But in the meantime, it's important to remain vigilant, keep the control measures on. So I'm going to talk about the vaccination hesitancy. And then in December 2020, we launched a vaccination question on the In-How We Feel app. So this work is led by my postdoc, Sean McCabe, in collaboration with colleagues across multiple institutions. So here is what we found using the first 2 months data of 35,000 cases, 35,000 people. And so this basically is the largest vaccine hesitancy study and in the US right now. So last spring, and we established a partnership with the state Connecticut government. So that's why we had more users from Connecticut of this app. And also because the Pinterest is located in California, so we had more users in California. And so in the map in the bottom on the left, that indicated vaccine hesitancy rate. And so you can see that southern state has a higher vaccine hesitancy rate. In the figure on the right, and this estimate about 18% of in the US population are vaccine hesitant, and the majority of them are undecided group. So what this tells us is that education and outreach effort are important to address the concerns of vaccination. And so our data showed that people of color are more likely to be vaccine hesitant. So if you look here, like among the white, 15% are vaccine hesitant, but among Black, 46% are vaccine hesitant, and among Hispanic, 30%, Asian, 21%. So if you look at these dark blue bars, those tell us that majority of the people who are vaccine hesitant are undecided group. So this tells us education and outreach effort are important. So here is a regression result. And so here is, sorry, it's a little small. So here you can see that we plot out on the figure on the left, the y-axis is vaccine hesitancy rate. X-axis in the first figure is a proportion of participants in each state which use protective measures such as mask wearing and social distancing. So this tells us for the state with a higher proportion of people using protective measure, and the vaccine hesitancy rate is lower. And so in the second figure and third figure, that plot vaccine hesitancy rate across the COVID burden. And so this is the state level cumulative case rate, and this is the state level cumulative death rate. So what this tells us, in the state with a higher COVID burden, they are higher vaccine hesitancy rate. Here are the regression results on the left without the IPW weight, on the right with the IPW weight. So it shows us females are more vaccine hesitant, and the people of color and are more vaccine hesitant. For example, Black people are 4 times more likely to be vaccine hesitant than white. So this is due to historical reason. Many of you know this Takinchi study, and the Black people were medically mistreated. And also the essential worker and healthcare worker, and they were more vaccine hesitant. And also younger people, they were more vaccine hesitant. And people with pre-existing conditions and in rural areas, and also the low income and the people living in the South, they are more vaccine hesitant. And also before the EUA, Pfizer EUA last December, people were more vaccine hesitant. After the EUA, more people were more likely to accept a vaccination. And also people who practice protective measures such as mask wearing and social distancing, they are less likely to be vaccine hesitant. And also the regions with a higher cumulative COVID burden, and they were more vaccine hesitant. So this basically is a summary. Vulnerable group, unfortunately, they are more likely to be vaccine hesitant, such as people of color, healthcare worker, essential worker, younger individual, females, regions with a higher COVID burden, and people with pre-existing medical conditions, parents, lower income people, and also people who don't practice protective measures. And so what this tells us is community engagement for vaccination, outreach, and education is extremely important in order for us to reach the COVID, in order for us to reach vaccination-induced herd immunity. So as you know that in order to reach the herd immunity, we need to have 70 to 90% of people who are vaccinated. So therefore, educational effort is critically important. So the take home number 3 is that it's important to remain vigilant and to scale up control measure and vaccination, protect vulnerable groups, including healthcare workers, elderly, essential workers, and also it's important to reopen slowly when the number of cases are sufficiently small. So last summer, multiple states in the South reopened too early. So we saw the increased cases in the South in the summer. And also it's important to know that resurgence is expected if one reopen too early and lift control measures too early. And so even though that right now the younger people were more likely to be infected than older people, and the death rate is lower, but we need to pay attention to long hauler. And so in terms of studying the long-term health effect. And in terms of vaccine hesitancy, and so it's important to build the public trust to increase vaccine uptake and education effort. So now let me talk about how can we safely reopen school. And in particular, I'm going to talk about efficient pooled testing using the hypergraph factorization design. And so this work is co-led by multiple junior colleagues and David Hong and Ronak and Brian Clear and Edgar from UPenn, and also Harvard. Ronak is my postdoc. Brian is at the Broad Institute. So let's first talk about what's going on and about school reopening in Massachusetts. As many of you know, that the governor has announced that elementary school will reopen on April 5, and middle school will reopen on April 28. So how can we reopen school safely? If you look at the data here, that this is a UK data, you can see that the pattern is very different from last spring. Last spring, the children has the lowest risk, but now you can see that the children has the highest risk among all the age groups. And a similar pattern had been observed in Israel and France. So this is likely to do the new variants. And we know the children are not eligible for vaccination right now. And so the teachers are vaccinated, but the children are not eligible for vaccination. They could infect others, children. So we need to protect the children. And then how many public schools have limited resources. And then how can we screen a large population with fewer tests, given many public schools has constrained resources? And one of the strategy is a pooled testing. So how does that work? Suppose we have 100 people, but the school can only afford 20 tests. So what can be done? And so the idea is, the simple idea using the Dorfman design is pool 10 samples and to pool 10 students in one pool. And then we have 10 pools. And then one test those 10 pools. This pool is positive. Then test every single student within this pool. We found this student was positive. So this, instead of doing 100 tests, here we do only 20 tests. However, this Dorfman design is not efficient, and because every individual is allocated to single pool, Q equal to 1. And so this design basically cycles through the pool until all individuals are assigned. Suppose we have 8 students and 6 pools, so basically allocate each student to one pool. And so this design is not optimal because only one pool per student without replicate. So this reduces sensitivity. So can we do better by allocating individual to more than to multiple pools? And so the naive approach is, suppose we allocate one student to 2 pools, make a Q equal to pool 2. So you can see the first student is allocated to pool AB, second student is allocated to AC, and so on. So what's the problem with this naive approach? You can see this naive approach, the design is not balanced. Pool A has 5 students, pool F has only one student, this will affect the sensitivity. We want to have the design as balanced as possible. So this is where this hyper design come from. And so we propose use this hypergraph factorization design. And so this based on component matrix. And so basically you can see that we try to make the design as balanced as possible. The first student is assigned to pool AB. Second student is assigned to pool CD. Third student assigned to pool EF. Fourth student assigned to pool BC, and so on. So each pool has 4 students. So this is balanced. So we test each of those 6 pools first, and then we found out those 3 pools are positive. Then we decode them, then find out those 3 subjects, 2, 4, 7 are likely to be positive. In the second stage, test each of those 3 and found out the subject 4 and 7 are positive. And so this basic idea is you can see that in the graph. So here, each vertex is the pool. We have 6 vertex, and the edge is the subject. So the person 1 is assigned to pool AB. So person 2 is assigned to pool CD. And we try to make this kind of the assignment and not overlap as much as possible to achieve the balance. So this design has multiple attractive features compared to the existing design, like random design, array design, and so on. It's balanced and also very easy to implement. And so it has more efficiency. So you can see that compared to the individual test design and the hyper design, as the efficiency is almost 6 and compared to the array design. And also this type of pooled testing is only malleable when the prevalence is low. So you can see when the prevalence is higher, the x-axis is the prevalence. When the prevalence is higher, there's no need for pooled testing. One can just do individual testing. And in the school setting, this is particularly useful because in school setting, the pooled design, the prevalence is low. So you can see compared to the array design, and the hyper design has a similar sensitivity, but a higher efficiency. And so here you can see this compared to the other type of design, the hyper design has better effective screening capacity, and especially when the resources is very limited. So you can see, suppose we have 3,000 subjects and one can only do 12 tests. And so you can see the effective screening capacity and is much better using this hyper design compared to other designs. So this screening effective screening capacity is calculated using the number of individuals screened multiply the average sensitivity. So the takeaway here is to scale up widespread testing, consider the pooled testing. And so Broad has been helping many schools in the New England area with the pooled testing. So this hyper design based on hypergraph factorization provide efficient pooled testing design to maximize balance and efficiency. And also pooled testing is useful when the prevalence is small, especially in school settings. When the prevalence is high, and just do individual testing. And we provided a website that allows the researchers and to design their experiment using this hyper design. To wrap up, so to fight against the COVID, everybody need to participate because nobody is safe until everybody is safe. So it's important to let the data speak and develop evidence-based strategies. And also we found that there were 2 features of the virus. One is a highly transmissible, second is highly convert. So it's important to remain vigilant using multifaceted intervention, and also important to speed up vaccination distribution, uptake, and also educational effort to address vaccination hesitancy. And also important to consider scalable testing, for example, pooled testing to help reopen school safely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zhihong, for a great and very timely presentation. as we all grapple with this pandemic and the effect that vaccines will have on the course of the pandemic. If you have any questions for Xiang, please put them in the Q&A. Or if any of the panelists have any questions, they should feel free to unmute and ask their question. So I'm going to go first. I'll take my prerogative as moderator. Do you see these efficient pooling strategy being adopted? I think that it's simpler for people to think about allocating people to a single pool. And I know even the high school in Newton has adopted this pooling strategy, but I'm not sure whether they do any of these fancy designs. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so this type of plastic design, meaning for the lab, is not for the school, because the school just collect the samples. And then in the lab, so especially like the broad, for example, it's at the robot. And so it's easier to do this type of designs. And so right now, in many schools, and so the current design is just based on this Dorfman design. Basically, put 10 samples in one pool and then test each pool separately. And then if any pool is positive, and then test individuals. And so this Dorfman design is very easy to implement. But if suppose like the school cannot afford many tests, then one can consider this more efficient design. But this is only for the labs.
Thank you for the clarification. Let's wait 30 seconds or a minute to see if anybody types in any questions. We have comments in the chat saying wonderful and informative talk. I think it was so timely of you to present on this topic that is so close to many of us.
Thank you.
We wish we could have had you in person since we are so close.
Thank you so much for mailing this to me, Claire. I'm really grateful. It's such a great honor. So yeah, I hopefully we can get together after the pandemic.
That's great. So it seems like your talk was very clear. Oh, here it is. Would it be a concern that antibodies would be diluted when pooling the sample together, or whether the pooling happens in RNA test?
So far, I think I haven't heard this type of issue so far. And yeah, that's a good question. But then the one thing is when one cannot put too many samples together, and so definitely there is the dilution issue. So if you look at so if you look here, so for example here, you can see that this is based on the pooled test sensitivity, and then this is based on the individual test sensitivity. So because the pooling sample will be diluted, and so therefore we will sacrifice the sensitivity because of dilution. And also this also emphasizes the importance of the balanced design. So if we just do this kind of naive designs, and then if the samples are not balanced, and so that will affect the dilutions, and then that will affect the sensitivity. So that's why it's important to consider the pooled design, balance the pooled design to improve sensitivity. So that is a great question. Yeah.
Well, let me congratulate you again on this well-deserved award. For the students in the audience, you have the opportunity at 1:15 to meet with Dr. Lin. It's a different link, so let's give her a 15-minute break, and you can ask her your questions during that student session. Thanks again and congratulations, and thank you all for attending this presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye. I'll join at 1:15.
Yeah, sounds good.
Bye.